Hi, this is David Miller, and I'm here with the fifth in a series of mini-lectures on Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Today we're going to talk about Darcy's character and Wickham's truth. You may still be wondering what it means for Elizabeth to read Darcy and not just his letter. You remember why he tells her he has to write the letter and she has to read it? My character required it to be written and read, he explains. What does he mean by that? Well, in the first place, he means that Wickham's false assertions, believed and repeated by Elizabeth, have slandered him. Darcy is the kind of man who cares deeply about his honor and reputation, so this is, of course, exactly where Wickham attacks him. You may remember that in one of the lectures on Romeo and Juliet, I used the Oxford English Dictionary to talk about the shades of meaning in the archaic word demean. The OED is equally useful in pinning down shades of meaning in ordinary words, or at least they seem ordinary. They're not archaic, but they were used differently 200 years ago than they are today. Words like candor, complacency, condescend, and in the examples I will discuss today, character and truth. So the definition that explains Darcy's use of the word character is number 13A in the dictionary, the estimate formed of a person's qualities. Reputation. Darcy is writing to Elizabeth to defend his reputation for dealing honorably with others. But behind that definition is another, the sum of the moral and mental qualities which distinguish an individual. This would be the qualities themselves as distinguished from the estimate formed of them. The estimate might be wrong. This is probably the definition that's most familiar to us today. We think of a person's character as the set of moral and psychological traits that they display consistently across varying situations. Character as reputation is a representation, accurate or not, of character in this more basic sense. So Darcy's letter is written to correct the false estimate Elizabeth has formed of his qualities. In making this correction, Darcy relies on some of the other meanings of the word character, which also can refer to a letter of the alphabet, or to the set of letters that make up a given alphabet, and also, this is interesting, the style of writing peculiar to any individual. It's only by reading his letters in his handwriting that Elizabeth comes to know Darcy's moral qualities. You remember early in the novel when Mr. Bennet reads a letter from Mr. Collins aloud to the family, telling them that they may judge the writer's character from his style of expression? That comic scene foreshadows the far more serious act of reading on which the plot of the novel turns. Elizabeth finds Darcy's style pompous and arrogant, whether he's stalking around a ballroom or putting together words and sentences. But as she reads his written characters in order to decode his moral character, her ideas begin to change. We'll come back to the idea of character as style, but for now, let me turn to another even more ordinary word, truth. Remember when Lizzie first tells Jane the terrible things Wickham has related to her about Darcy, and Jane doesn't want to believe them. One does not know what to think, she frets, but Elizabeth, so sure of herself, replies, I beg your pardon. One knows exactly what to think. She believes Wickham. Why? Well, she gives more than one reason, but among them she declares there was truth in his looks. Now, what exactly does that mean, I wonder? Here again, the OED can help, for the word truth, it tells us, doesn't only mean conforming to the facts. It also refers to the disposition to speak or act truly or without deceit, truthfulness, veracity, sincerity. Formerly, sometimes in wider sense, honesty, uprightness, righteousness, virtue, integrity. In other words, Wickham looked honest. That, of course, raises the question, what exactly does honesty look like? Let's go back to that conversation Lizzie is recounting to Jane. At one point, Wickham tells her he will never publicly expose Darcy because he honors the memory of Darcy's father. Elizabeth, the narrator tells us, honored him for such feelings, and thought him handsomer than ever as he expressed them. I believe it's no accident that the particular sentiment of honoring the father excites Lizzie's admiration. After all, she is her own father's favorite, as we've seen. But the most interesting thing about this moment is the way the appeal of the sentiment Wickham is expressing combines with the appeal of his good looks to make him seem even handsomer. This is a purely subjective impression, rendered with great subtlety by the narrator, who is showing us exactly in the moment how an illusion about another person takes shape. The philosopher John Locke, late in the 17th century, analyzed the human mind's tendency, as he put it, to take that for the perception of our sensation, which is an idea formed by our judgment. This is exactly what Lizzie is doing. She has formed an idea in her judgment and thinks that her eyes are seeing it. You've heard that seeing is believing. What Locke and Austin in different ways are telling us is that sometimes it's just the opposite. Believing is seeing. A little farther on in the same conversation, Lizzie expresses her outrage at the way Darcy has treated Wickham, and the narrator tells us she could have added, "A young man, too, like you, whose very countenance may vouch for your being amiable." Now, how does someone's countenance vouch for his being amiable? That last word is carefully chosen. The OED reminds us that although its first meaning may be friendly, amicable, kind, a second meaning, no longer current today, lurks in the immediate background. When Elizabeth says this about Wickham, she also means worthy to be loved, lovable, lovely. To vouch for something means to guarantee its truth. How can a countenance, a face, the expression we see in it, do that? Well, it can't unless we're doing what Locke describes, projecting our ideas into the face before us and then thinking we behold them there. You think that ever happens? Elizabeth's idea of Wickham is in this way based on her own desires. She's been slighted by Darcy, hasn't she, at the dance, and she's flattered by Wickham. In listening to his story, she is transforming her own desire into the truth she sees or fancies she sees in his looks. This is the process she must undo by learning to read backward. We've seen a much less subtle version of this process related in satiric tones by the narrator in an earlier scene. At the very first ball in Meryton, the narrator tells us, Mr. Bingley makes a good impression, but his friend Mr. Darcy soon drew the attention of the room by his fine tall person, handsome features, noble mien, and the report which was in general circulation within 5 minutes after his entrance of his having 10,000 a year. The gentlemen pronounced him to be a fine figure of a man. The ladies declared he was much handsomer than Mr. Bingley, and he was looked at with great admiration for about half the evening. The word mean in this passage is another careful choice. Like countenance, it refers to the face, but not merely to its shape. Both words refer to the way a person bears himself, his air and attitude, his manner. That is, they refer not just to his features, but to the combination of feature and expression, as these seem to convey what we've learned to call character. You can tell that the narrator in this passage is making fun of the people at the ball for being impressed by Darcy's wealth. If you read backward, and here again I mean that quite literally, you get a pretty good sense that the handsome features and noble mien, which come first in the sentence, are largely a result of the report about his income, which ironically concludes the list of qualities by which Darcy attracted attention. Sure enough, the sentence that tells us he was admired for about half the evening continues, till his manners gave a disgust which turned the tide of his popularity, for he was discovered to be proud, to be above his company, and above being pleased. And not all his large estate in Derbyshire could then save him from having a most forbidding, disagreeable countenance, and being unworthy to be compared with his friend. Read this passage backwards, and you will recognize that Darcy probably looks the same at the end of the evening as he did at the beginning. What changes is the way others perceive him based on their own desires for his wealth and status, and their own vanity offended when he ignores them. This reversal in the impression of Mr. Darcy is the one Lizzie will have to perform in re-reverse when she learns to read his character accurately by reading backwards from purported truth to actual desire. When she does, she will return to everyone's first impression of Mr. Darcy with a deepened and hard-earned sense of its validity. Next time, we'll talk a little more about Darcy's style, and we'll spend some time talking about the symbolism of distance in the novel.